Many of them had lost their families and were trying to build new lives for themselves. In our house, they were usually cheerful, full of jokes, always ready to tease me with stories and riddles. But they never said a word about the war. I once overheard one of my adopted uncles, the one I loved best, a man who had been in Auschwitz, describing something from the war. I heard him use the word unspeakable. It made no sense to me. How could something be unspeakable? How could my friend have seen something that could not be spoken, even to us, even so far away from where it had happened? This was a true riddle. I wanted to ask questions to find out more. As an adult, of course, I have learned about some of the things he must have experienced, but I could never ask him. His story remains untold, untellable. That is one kind of silence, charged with too many stories, haunted and unutterable. There is another kind of silence that comes from a lack of stories. I once went to a funeral for an old man I hadn't really known. I listened to people talking afterwards and was shocked to realize that no one had any stories to tell about him. There were no memories, no scraps of history, no notable events to recount, even on the day he was put back into the ground. Another riddle. How can a human being live with such a seal on his heart, never taking or being given enough notice to yield a single memorable story? This old man had simply passed from one silence into another. Then there was my mother's father. His life was, to him, pure legend. He replayed his oral home movies over and over again to his most eager and devoted listener, me. My grandfather had grown up in Romania, gone to Paris to study engineering, joined, while there, the Society for the Prevention of Seasickness, and still had a set of Indian barbells to prove it. Traveled to Japan to lay the foundations for skyscrapers, discovering there the pleasures of mixed-sex bathhouses, and wound up in San Francisco designing and laying out power lines in the high Sierras. I, a skinny, bespectacled middle-class kid, was enchanted by the thought of my fiery, irascible Romanian Jewish grandfather riding a mule in the mountains of California. When he was ready to get married, he wrote to his mother back in the old country, asking her to find him a suitable wife. He had 3 conditions. She was to be beautiful, she was to have a good singing voice, she was to come from a port city. The reason for the last was that a woman raised in a port city could be expected to have a certain worldliness and not be merely a sheltered, over-refined Eastern European bourgeoisie. The happy part of the story is that such a woman did become his wife. Beautiful, gracious, unaffected, cultured, a marvelous singer. La Bohème was her favorite opera. And she happened to come from the greatest port in the history of the world. Constantinople, once Byzantium, now Istanbul. The sad part is that the Romanian fascists kicked him out of the country, and he spent the entire war separated from his wife and daughter, unable to bring them to safety. The saddest book I own is the diary he kept during those years. How they managed to survive on their own in Bucharest is another story. Perhaps not surprisingly, my grandfather had had an experience with a ghost. Here's the story. The tale of Nathan Louis Pavis. He was living in San Francisco at the time, and his own grandfather had emigrated from Romania and settled in St. Louis, Missouri. One night, my grandfather had a dream. He dreamt that his grandfather opened the door of his room and entered, radiant with light. He came to the bed and spoke. "Nick, I have come to tell you I love you very much. You are a good man. Now, I must say goodbye." So saying, he disappeared. The next morning, my grandfather remembered his dream. He wanted to know how his grandfather in St. Louis was doing, but he didn't have his address. He wrote a letter back to Romania asking for news. A letter finally arrived a few weeks later. The news was sad. His grandfather had died. He had died on the very night of my grandfather's dream. Why do we tell these stories? Why do we make life out to be a kind of legend, something you can refold into a